everyone. Welcome to another edition of Spilling the Tea on GovCon. I'm Teresa Moon, Director of Marketing for Parabolis. We are the preeminent partnership for government contractors, providing holistic support that includes a line of credit to fund your growth. The purpose of this podcast is to assist small businesses with success in the federal marketplace by introducing them to industry experts and resources that they may not otherwise know about. Today, my guest is a leading voice in this industry, host of Game Changers for Government Contractors podcast, partner of RSM Federal, and all-around GovCon expert, Michael LeJeune. This is an exciting opportunity to have you on our show and share with our network your expert insights. So thank you so very much for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to chat with me.
Absolutely. And I appreciate it, especially because you've been traveling. So hopefully this is a little break for your brain and we'll have a little fun. And I know a lot of people, I've been telling everyone that you've been coming on, of course, but there might be some people that are listening that might not know who you are. So if you wouldn't mind, take a few minutes to formally introduce yourself, let them know your experience in the government contracting industry, and tell them a little bit about RSM Federal and, of course, your podcast.
Sure. Yeah. So I've been in this industry for a little over 24 years now, which seems really odd to say that kind of a number. I got my start in it because I was in the Army before and I was working with a bunch of government contractors, didn't really understand government contracting at the time. So I got out and transitioned in the world, learned it the hard way, kind of from the bottom up. And over the last 20 something years, have been helping clients to navigate government contracting. So when I started, there weren't any websites, there weren't any training platforms, there weren't YouTube videos you could go watch or any of that kind of stuff. You literally had to just figure it out on your own. And so me and my partner, Josh Frank, we sat down and figured it out on our own and built a small company doing this, actually winning contracts. And then we transitioned that into RSM Federal, which now helps government contractors win contracts as well. So we do a lot of coaching and consulting with them. We have a group coaching platform, a one-on-one coaching platform. We do some consulting. And then we also have our podcast and our books. We have, I think it's five Amazon #1 best-selling books out in the market. I think my favorite one is called I'm New to Government Contracting, Where Do I Start? And that really kind of covers the gamut. If I were to go back in time and start this process, those are all the things I would want to know as a rookie in this business. And I have people who've been in the business 20 years that are like, man, I've learned so much from that book. So that's probably the book I would recommend to a lot of folks if they're looking for some education. But we have that. We have our podcast is in our 9th or 10th year now.
Oh, wow.
So we've been doing that for a really long time and really love that. So there's a lot of opportunity to connect with us in a bunch of different ways. So.
And I love the fact that you point out that you learned the hard way when there weren't a lot of resources. And I think that that's probably the best piece of advice that I give to people most often is that you learn from other people's experience, people like you who, kind of were the trailblazers along the way that really understand it from the inside out, because not a whole lot changes with the government over a long period of time. 24 years is not a lot of change that you see in terms of process with the government, but being able to have access to education the way that we do now because of people like you and work that you and Josh do in the industry is key. And I think that's awesome. And so that the book that you reference is not one that I have. I do have a couple of your others. So I'm going to grab that because I imagine there's a lot of good wealth of knowledge.
It's my favorite.
That's impressive. And I'm impressed.
Book coming out in March-ish timeframe. And we've got another one coming out in 26. So we're pretty good roadmap for books coming out. And I really enjoy writing.
Yeah. I share that with you as well. And I think this is a good segue into, when I was thinking about what I wanted to chat with you about, knowing how long you had been in the industry, I think you probably write about it a lot as well. Your experiences have garnered a lot of ability to pivot and navigate and be agile in certain circumstances, especially with sharing information with people who are starting out fresh right now. What would you say, especially with your background within business development, which is the key role in the whole process? What are 3 key tactics with regard to success in business development that a growing government contractor should be focused on?
Yeah. I think when most people think about the tactics and the strategies and all that type of stuff, their focus is on what I would consider maybe too granular of focus of, well, who should I be calling and what should I be saying to them and things like that. And those are all really good tips. You need to know that you should call contracting officers and small business reps and teaming partners. You need to know to do that kind of stuff. That's really important. But I think where a lot of people struggle in BD is number one, they don't have a process. They're just kind of winging it. So
Mhm.
I think for me, for somebody to have a clearly defined process is probably the number one thing. If you don't have a clearly defined process in this, you can't measure what you're doing right and wrong. And so the moment you have a very clear process with very clear steps, you can see that 80% of your prospects get to step 3 and fall off. So there's something either broken in step 3 or broken in step 4. And
Mhm.
so the clear process is really important. And this is really, it's business fundamentals. And that's where I think a lot of people struggle as well, is they don't understand that government contracting is still just a business. And we get too wrapped up in the government speak of it and not
Mhm.
the business fundamentals of it. And so very clear process for your sales team, BD team, whatever it is you call them. I don't want to say that's the number 2 tip, but don't get too hung up on the words because
Yeah.
people interchange so many of the words. But having a very clear process is probably the first one. Understanding how much time it's really going to take and being patient with yourself is probably number 2,
Mhm.
because people get into this and think, well, I can get a contract in 30 days or 60 days. Well, maybe, and it might be small, but the
Mhm.
significant things are going to take a really long time, especially when you first get into this.
Right.
And so really embracing that and not being too hard on yourself in the early stages is really important. And then the third one is really about the relationship side of it. Like, what does that actually look like to build the relationship with people?
Mhm.
And I see too often where people get in the business and they're making a phone call to someone that they think can buy from them. And it's just sales pitch after sales pitch. And there's no depth, there's no learning. In this business, you're rarely selling. 90% of the time, you are trying to gather information that can go into an RFI, a sources sought, or even a proposal or a conversation with a teaming partner. You're trying to develop relationships where people will open up, you can gather information, and then you can use that into another step. And so, those are probably 3 things that I think are very overlooked when it comes to the BD world. And if I had to throw a fourth out there, it would be understanding how to do research.
Mhm.
People don't know how to do research,
Right.
or you could go and look in this system and find that. And people are just baffled that this information is out there
Mhm.
and they don't know how to search for it. So I think those are 4 things that I
There you
think
go.
people really struggle with. And if they could wrap their head around that, they would
Mhm.
go much faster in this business.
I think simple is good, right? Why overthink it? And
Yeah.
and what you're saying makes complete sense. It's a lot of stuff that we talk about with our network and our clients all the time as well. I think, to pinpoint the one that we speak about the most, and probably because it's the one that I'm most comfortable with, is the relationship side of it. I think
Mm,
people all too often get intimidated by the process, that they forget that the government and the people that they're dealing with are just people too.
yeah.
And so they attribute too much power to the status of their
Yes.
position, that they think that they're unapproachable. And some people, you and I know people that might put out that vibe too, that makes
Yeah.
them feel like they aren't as approachable as they should be. And that's on them. But for the most part, if you get to know people and show up at events and frequent the places where they're going to be, people enjoy engaging with government. People that I know enjoy engaging with business owners, and the intimidation factor, once they get over that hump, then it makes the relationship process of it a lot easier. And I think it's just, you
Yeah.
don't, that's trial and error. You got to go out and put yourself out there and be a little bit vulnerable and kind of be the outsider until you're not anymore. And sometimes some of us are faster made to get to the middle of the group than
Yeah.
others, but I think it's such a human to human process, and you like to work with people who because you trust them, so you're quicker
Yeah.
to pick someone that you've actually met before than someone that just has a great resume. And so
Right.
I always encourage that as well. So I'm glad that at least I'm on the right track with some of
Yeah.
the recommendations that
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah. I think
giving
that's
there.
really important. So,
Yeah, absolutely. And when I speak to the newer businesses too, what I find most often is that they're really good at whatever the core competency is of their business. So they're more of a functional operator than they are a bona fide business leader. They might not know all the ins and outs of it. Figuring that part out on top of having to learn how to do government contracting, because the process, even if they had been in the commercial market for a while, there is no foundation that you build there that you can
right.
translate over into how we do business with the federal government. So,
Exactly. And
mhm.
that's funny you mentioned that. I saw a need for more leadership training over the last 2, 3 years. And that's actually the next book that I have coming out. It's all on leadership for business owners. So
Awesome. So stay tuned for that one because I'm sure
that'll be a
people
lot of
are
fun.
dying for it.
Yeah,
I
that'll be a
mean,
lot of fun.
it's super important. And so I think this is a great leeway into my next question for you in terms of common misconceptions and even mistakes that the newer businesses, the growing businesses fall victim to within BD. You talked about it a little bit with your recommendations with
Mhm.
it, but I'm sure that you see, especially with businesses that come to you for your educational programs, what are some of the things that they're missing the mark on that they figure out after they talk to you or have a couple of missteps?
Yeah. So the first one that I see is like when you get down to them actually describing the value they provide, it's so generic that there's no value in this thing you just gave me, your capability statement, your corporate overview, whatever it is. There's just no value. There's a lot of buzzwords and things like that. So people really struggle to communicate their value.
Mhm.
And we sit down and look at metrics so that you can say you've actually done something. So, like if you go to our website, it'll tell you that we've helped our clients win $14.5 billion in government contracts. We've trained over 24,000 contractors.
Wow.
We have our 5 Amazon best-selling books, and there's other metrics that we throw out there as well. But for people to actually be able to throw out metrics that show you've actually done something, the government's been burned a lot. And there's a lot of companies that say they're the best in class, best of breed, best some other world galaxy something. And it's all a bunch of garbage. And the government can just see right through it. And so they're
Mhm.
sifting through hundreds of capability statements every single year. And you've got to find a way to stand out with that. And then when you go into the networking side and your relationship side, being able to actually express that in a way that makes somebody want to listen to you. So I think that's one of the first things for a lot of people, because what I see besides the buzzwords is people open up with things like, well, I'm an 8A woman owned SDVOSB, every other certificate they could ever think of collecting, right? They think of that as the value they provide, and it's just not. Which kind of leads me to another one is people think if I get a small business status such as SDVOSB or 8A, that's going to just, the floodgates are going to open,
Right.
when they don't realize there's more money being awarded at full and open. And then the second category is small.
Mhm.
It's not even 8A or anything. It's just small. So if
Mhm.
you're a small business, you don't even have to go check all these boxes. And there's a lot of opportunity for you. And so they chase these certifications and think once I get that, that's going to do it. And then you put business development on hold till you get that. And like, oh, I don't really want to make a lot of phone calls because I don't have this certification. Well, you're already small. You
Mhm.
can make the phone calls, which kind of leads me to yet another one is when I look at people's sales process, they are only focused on responding to RFPs.
Mhm.
That's it. And there's so much pre-work that needs to be done to learn about a client, to learn about what's going on, to ask questions, do pre-solicitation work, things like that. You should be spending way more time on that than just responding to RFPs.
Mhm.
And so those are a handful. There's one that really annoys me right now that's out there in the market. As soon as I say it, you'll probably jump on it too. Is there's a lot of push on YouTube and TikTok for
Mhm.
people to jump on the middleman strategy, which is really basically I make nothing. I don't really provide any service. I'm just going to be a middleman and kind of sell things and sit at home in my underwear and make money. Right.
Right.
And it's so difficult to run that strategy.
Mhm.
And there's so many pitfalls in that strategy where you can wind up getting sued by the government. You can wind up being convicted of something for breaking the law. You can be debarred from doing work because you don't understand the intricacies of government. Maybe following bad advice would be a one to lump people in there, because that's to me where the middleman falls in. You can be in the middle and do business, but you really have to have a very sound strategy to do it. And that's one of the reasons we don't recommend it. But I think those are a handful of the pitfalls that I see. I could probably talk all day on
I
just
know. It is one of those things, isn't it? Especially because when you're in business development for as long as you've been in it, I did it for a few years before being with Parabolas for small contractors. And, so I saw a lot because I was so intimately working with the executive team because I was on as such a small team. So I was able to
yeah.
see from the business owner's perspective how they sometimes their strategy is a lack thereof, and it's more
Yeah.
of a throwing spaghetti up against the wall. And it's hard to be a part of that because, especially in business development, that's your reputation that you're going out with, because the
Yeah.
majority of the work is earned on the relationships that you have as opposed to the proficiencies sometimes. At least that's how it was in my experience. And
Yeah.
so sometimes that's a tough sell when you're not too sure about who you've gotten into business with on the other side. But
Right.
now being on the other side of it as a service provider, when I speak to people a lot, it's the same thing. Don't lead with your certifications because no one cares. You really need to be able to define yourself in an articulate way. And that isn't easy for everyone. Just like
Right.
someone could be a good writer in short form, but wouldn't be able to write a book, you know? And so I think it's the same thing. Just because they're really good at what they do, they might not be really good at talking about it. So they need to hire someone to help them figure out what that
Mhm.
language looks like. Because when you ask someone, or I've seen people walk up to like a small business director for a large prime at a conference, and they're very gracious and they're like, "Oh, what do you guys do?" And they're like, "Whatever you need." And it's like all of a sudden the air around them
Yeah.
gets sucked out, and it's
Yeah.
like, I'm going to walk away.
Struggle to figure that out.
And it's like, that isn't what they wanted to hear. So if that's what you were aiming for, is just telling them what they want to hear,
Yeah.
that was the wrong thing.
Right.
Write that down so you never do it again. But you live and you learn, of course, right?
Right.
And that's the way it works, unfortunately. But I prefer to learn from people who have already been there, like yourself, and read your book, and all the things you tell me not to do. Make sure that I take note of that and not
Right.
try to make that mistake as well.
That's the smart way to do it, because we've spent a lot of time and effort not only going through all this, but compiling the best practices.
Yeah.
So why not learn from a best practice? You know, whether it's a $25 book or whether it's 3 or 4 hours watching free YouTube videos, there's
Mhm.
so much good advice out there.
Yeah.
When you find the right people that you can go and connect with and get some really good insights.
My next question for you, and it kind of reminds me of conversations that I've had with my 14-year-old lately. I always say, even knowing what I know now, I'd never go back and be 14 years old again, mostly because of the world we live in and how
Yeah.
much it's changed. And there's so much of the emotional side of stuff that would
Right.
still be the same, even though I'm smarter and wiser and all the other
Right.
things that you gain with experience. But knowing what you know today with regard to being in business development and sales and government contracting, what would you change about what you did when you were actively practicing it in the industry?
Yeah.
What would you tell your old self?
Yeah. I think the first one would be to hire somebody like myself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Bring somebody in. We didn't, at the time, didn't know those people existed. And maybe there weren't some good ones out there that we could have chosen from.
Mhm.
But I've watched it in our business with our clients, just how quickly we get them over those humps. Do your due diligence, find somebody good that can help you navigate this, and they will save so much time,
Mhm.
because that's the biggest challenge most people have, is the time. They don't have the time to waste to grow their business. So if you can find things that will accelerate your time, like a great coach or a consultant, I think that's probably the first thing that I would tell them. The second thing that I would look at is, instead of trying to have 14 or 15 core competencies or whatever, make sure like we do one thing really well. And that's the
Mhm.
focus of what we do. I think too many people can do a lot of things, but shouldn't,
Yeah.
because they're spreading themselves very thin. And so they're selling one service over here at this agency, another service at this agency. They're not really cross pollinating that stuff. And it just really muddies the water in the business. So if you can just go deep into one product or service,
Mhm.
go deep into one agency, you're going to get traction so much faster than everybody else around you. So don't try to do too many things, because it's just not helpful. And I get it. As an entrepreneur, you see all these bright, shiny objects and you want to chase them.
Yeah.
And you just got to have the discipline to say, no, that's not good for our company. It's not good for the direction we want to go. And if we want to accelerate, we've got to just laser focus everything, our entire
Yeah.
team.
Well, you just spread yourself too thin. And so
Yep.
if you're jack of all trades, you're a master of none, right? And so I think it's with anything that's a good point of advice there. I mean, I always think of the baseball analogy with a baseball pitcher, right? It's the World Series going on right now. I'm
Yeah.
not a baseball fan, but the analogy of the pitcher having that one great pitch. So you've got a guy that's got a great fastball. He's not out trying to master the curveball too. He's going to throw
Yeah.
that fastball because that's what he's good at. and he's going to
Yeah.
throw it until his arm falls off,
But even as a pitcher,
Mhm.
he's not too worried about
Right.
they're not too worried about that. They're not too worried about how they catch something in the outfield. They're so laser focused on pitching
Mhm.
and then the micro niche of that perfect ball.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think your example there is such a good one because it's almost a niche within a niche.
Mhm.
And they're so focused at it where a lot of people aren't even good generic ball players. They're
Right.
like, well, I'm not really that good on the field. I'm better at managing, but I'm not really good at that either. And so it's like you got to get good at something,
Mhm.
or else you're going to have a mediocre company. Most companies are mediocre. I mean,
Mhm.
when you look at a lot of the businesses that are out there, a lot of them are struggling, and they're trying to figure this stuff out because they're just chasing their tail. So if I were to give one other tip, stop jumping from one bright shiny object to another.
Yeah.
Like people will start on their business plan, give it 90 days or less and be like, we're 3 weeks into this thing and I don't like the way it's going. So we're just going to drop this and build a new plan. And
Mhm.
it takes you 3 to 5 years of focus
Yep.
to really get traction in a business.
Mhm.
And you've got to be willing to stay the course for 3 to 5 years. No,
Yep.
it should be growing, but you may not have your explosive success until year 4. And
Mhm.
so if you stop doing something that's working, you will not get where you want to go because then all that effort's just gone and it's gone into something else. When you switch gears and directions, you go back to ground zero
Right.
and try to build momentum from that. And that's
Mhm.
often the worst thing you can do. So,
I agree with you. I sat at the HubZone conference in July in a session, and someone said something similar to what you just said, that 3 to 5 years is where that patience level of where you really start to hit the ground, where the rubber meets the road for your business.
right.
And the people in the audience whose blood drained from their face are probably those people who won't get past year 3 because
Yeah.
they wouldn't be so discouraged by hearing it if they already were discouraged at the point they were in their process already. And so I think patience is really key. A lot of people want something to kick off faster, and you're saying it and a lot of other people in the industry that have been doing it for a long time. There's a difference between someone that just has studied it and then is sharing what they've learned from it. You
Yeah.
practiced it for a long time before you ever started coming into the education side of it.
And I
There's a
wasn't
lot to be.
patient. I should say that. I was not patient. I was always wanting it to move faster, but we
Mhm.
kept doing the things that were working. And like I grew up on a farm and we were on a soybean farm and you could not make it grow faster.
Right.
It wasn't ready until it was ready.
Mhm.
It didn't matter what you did. Some days it was going to rain more and then you had to wait for the sun to dry it out. And then we go do a test sample and it was ready when it was ready.
Right.
There's nothing we could do. You just had to keep nurturing it and watching over your crop, and then boom, it was ready. And
Right.
that's a lot of the same thing in business.
Yeah. Patience is key. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
So, my last question for you is a little bit more on the personal side, of course,
Yeah.
but who or and what are your biggest influences in your career? That one person, or is that one or more instances that really has impacted you the most?
Yeah. Probably one of the most influential kind of came out of left field for me. So I was traveling to DC and I was reading on the flights and all this kind of stuff. And I was reading this one book and I'd tell you whose book it was, but I know it's going to rock, it's going to rock the world of a lot of people. So I'm not going to tell you that book, but he recommended somebody else in the book and it was Tony Robbins. And I was like, oh, who's this guy? I've seen this guy late at night. And I went and picked up Tony Robbins' book, Awaken the Giant Within.
Yeah.
And that book just rocked my world. I think
Mhm.
I read the first 28 pages, changed the whole direction of my life, and became a coach and a consultant and everything, and kind of never looked back. And so that's probably the most influential person in my life is Tony and his stuff. I wound up being a coach in Tony's business division for several years. I worked with Chet Holmes in that business division.
Uh-huh.
If I look at who's really influential now, some of the people that government people may not have any clue about, but Gary Vaynerchuk
Mhm.
he's huge in the market in social media and a lot of different things.
Okay.
Love his business philosophies, his life philosophies, how he runs things. So he's really really important to me to follow. Alex Hormozy is another one where I watch Alex's stuff. He's in his 30s, I think, late 20s, early 30s, and just tearing up the business market right now. But he is really he's so wise beyond his years. And
Mhm.
so he's got a really great podcast called The Game that I listen to quite often. So that's another good one. I'm constantly doing a lot of self-improvement and things like that. I just picked up Jordan Peterson's book, Mel Robbins' book.
Yep.
There's a couple other people out there. They have such deep insight into just life and other things. And I really think for a lot of folks, if they could embrace the one thought, it's from Jim Rohn, he said, never wish life were easier, wish you were better.
Mm-hmm.
Life gets a lot easier the better you get.
Yeah.
And so if you can just constantly keep working on improving yourself and getting better, that just make a massive difference in your life. So
Yeah.
those are a handful of the ones I put out there. Work harder on yourself than you do on your business. The business
Mm-hmm.
will just get easier, right? So, but I think those are probably my biggest influences.
I love that. And now I know that we've got some stuff in common outside of the industry too, because I love Tony Robbins. I used to joke when I was single and told people he was my boyfriend. And funny enough, I had people go, "You dated Tony Robbins?" And I'm like, "No, I just was so obsessed with personal development that I listened to him and read his books enough that I felt like I was in a relationship with him because I
Yeah.
talked about him like he was my boyfriend."
Yeah. And and Tony's one of those guys that I think a lot of people laughed at him when he was early in the days doing infomercials and things like that. If you look at him now, that man is so wise and he's so good at what he does. When Chet Holmes passed away, Tony was in Fiji doing a conference. That night, he got on his plane to come home and he called all of us.
Mhm.
And so we spent 30 minutes on the phone with Tony on his personal plane on the way home from Fiji, just to say, "Hey guys, Chet's gone, but we're going to keep taking care of you guys." So that was kind of like a moment for me of like,
Yeah.
getting to chat with Tony Robbins one-on-one
So
for
cool.
30 minutes. But he just cares so much about people.
Yeah.
And so he's just a really good guy.
Well, I think people with the kindest and biggest hearts have typically been through the hardest challenges and overcome it and are sharing and giving back. And he's a perfect example of that.
Yeah,
And I'm a big fan of
absolutely.
him as well. I did a lot of listening to Les Brown too. I mean, I grew
Yeah.
up in Florida and he was on the radio down here for a long time.
Yeah. There's so
Big,
many good,
big
like,
fan of his too.
you can find a book, a podcast, a radio show with somebody really good on it that you're going to gel with. Cause not everybody's going to like Tony. Not everybody's going to like Les. Not everybody's going to like Jordan Peterson or Mel Robbins or whoever. Like they're not
Right.
going to like them. But there's so many people out there that you will like. It's just
Yeah.
a matter of finding somebody and starting to listen to their stuff. And it's just
Absolutely.
very helpful. So,
Well, I'll encourage everyone, if you're not already, you need to start listening to Game Changers. It's a good one. I'm one of those, I like to geek out when I'm exercising. So a lot of times I'm sweating and I'm listening. And I'm very appreciative
thank
to
you.
the guests that you have on because I am learning every day something new thanks to shows like yours. So thank
Thank you. I
you.
appreciate it.
Absolutely. And thank you again for your time. I hope that this was a good enough experience that I can coerce you to come back again sometime soon.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'd
Awesome.
love to. Thank you.
Of course. And thank you all for joining us. As always, we pride ourselves on sharing the most insightful and exciting people and information to help you better navigate your GovCon journey. If you like what you heard today, you can see and hear all of our past podcasts, which are archived on our YouTube channel by the same name. Stay tuned for all of our future guests in the coming months as we help you grow to great heights in the year ahead. I'm Teresa Moon, and this is Spilling the Tea on GovCon. Have a great day, my friends.